We've got the screen going, and now record. Well, Cara, thank you so much for setting your time aside. I have to share with you, when I heard your TED Talk, I had to meet you. I wanted to connect with you. You are somebody who does not take no for an answer. The way are living your life, the way you're putting yourself out there to challenge stereotypes, to challenge the way people perceive individuals who are living with a disability. I am so thankful that you are willing to share your time, your wisdom, and your lived experience with our audience. And I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for making yourself available for this connection.
Well, thank you, Kyle. I know it's going to be an awesome conversation.
Absolutely. So I know that some of our listeners may not be familiar with you, what you look like, your story. So just to help those have those challenges of not being able to gain familiarity with that, would you share a little bit about really where you are and your journey in life a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm Indian and English, so I'm an Indian biracial woman. I'm a two-time immigrant. I was born in India and then immigrated to Canada, where I was raised and educated I finished my undergraduate degree in Canada. I presently live in Atlanta, Georgia, with my husband, John, and our two fur babies, Bubba and Moon, who are our cats, Southern cats. And I was very lucky to fulfill a childhood dream right out of college and join the United Nations. I always wanted to become a humanitarian and serve with the humanitarian agencies of the UN. I joined the World Food Program, the Food Aid Agency, at age 24 in Ecuador in South America, and then went on to 10 more countries before moving to the United States
Wow.
7 years ago. And it's a pretty phenomenal ride, to say the least.
Yeah, there's some beautiful video of you serving in communities of obvious distressed social and economical conditions. Like I imagine you have some amazing stories of being in those communities and serving children that are in scenarios that are probably pretty challenging for most Americans to wrap their mind around. Like when you think about that experience, what in serving those children in those communities, what lesson and what value did you pull from that career experience that serves you today the most?
I've lived in Haiti, Madagascar, Mozambique, Thailand, China, just a few countries to name. And I think it's twofold what I've learned as a humanitarian and now as an entrepreneur. First and foremost, team effort. Working for the World Food Program, working for UNICEF, which is the United Nations Children's Fund, it is not you alone serving. It's very much the entire team of the agency themselves. The national staff play a massive role, and your partners on the ground. And I think that acknowledgement of everything is done within team experts who are the best of the best is always important to acknowledge. So it's an amazing place to learn. I learned more in my years on the job than I ever did in school from a textbook about what it meant to be a humanitarian. When you see that level of poverty every single day, honestly, for me, it was a sense of this is where I belong because it brings profound purpose and clarity to the job that you're slogging at. You work very long hours, but you've seen the children on the streets who are not wearing school uniforms, who are carrying jerry cans and wearing rags, who don't have shoes on. You know that part of your job is, my job in particular, is fundraiser, raising money so that UNICEF can help build more schools to get those children into school. So as mentioned, it's ensuring they not only have an education, but they have a future. You have a profound sense of purpose and belonging, of understanding who you're serving. It also puts your life into constant perspective. All these countries that I lived in, no matter how poor they were, no matter whether it was a post-conflict country like Angola, which had just come out of 27 years of civil war, or working in Haiti, I arrived a year after the earthquake and the country was still devastated. Your life is so privileged. I never go hungry. I have a roof over my head. I have a security team that supports me. And so when you live with that level of perspective of how fortunate you are, you express, and you can express gratitude for it. You experience joy and highs and lows in a completely different way. The way therefore you approach your job and also your personal relationships is very different. there's a very low threshold for BS.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, there's two different paths that could unfold with that. Is it one? I would think that the just the tremendous amount of gratitude for those things that most of us, you flip the light switch on and electricity is available, you turn the water on and something clean and potable comes out, like those things that most of us go throughout our day, and we give no second thought to it whatsoever, and just how blessed and privileged, heat, light, clean and warm water, like, and it's one of the things that I very much preach to people is get to versus have to, right? Like, so often we say, I have to go pay the bills, right? I have to pay the bills right now. I have to, and the truth is that the people you were serving would love to get the opportunity to pay an electric bill. Well,
And I think we have to acknowledge, though, that there are people here in the United States that live in extreme poverty.
no question.
There are tens of thousands, millions of people who live below the poverty line who aren't able to pay the bill. And I
100%.
think when, we can take ourselves out of our, privilege bubbles that we live in. I live in, beautiful suburban neighborhood, middle class lifestyle in the United States, but can acknowledge that 1 mile down the street, there are communities that don't have that same privilege. That defines how I live my life or how I choose to live my life.
Yeah, that's such a powerful understanding, is this lens of perspective that this experience gave you, and how that ability to take yourself into situations that were early on less familiar to you, and how that lens of perspective, it sounds like, is forever changed the way you live and the way you show up, one, in your own life, in your own existence, your own experiences, and then also how you interact with others along your daily journey and weekly journey.
Yeah, definitely. And it came at a very young age. I decided at the age of 6 that I wanted to be a humanitarian and work for the United Nations.
Really?
It was watching a telethon in Canada. It was a very social justice minded country. Our education system is as well. And there was a telethon raising money for starving children on the African continent. And at a very young age of 6, because I was already experiencing trauma with an alcoholic mother at a young
Mm.
age. People who experience trauma often have very high levels of compassion and empathy. And so I felt drawn to these kids who were suffering in a way that I wasn't. And somehow this calling towards to say, I could help make a difference in their life. It was like a light bulb that went off. And it was, I could raise money, and this money is going to help those kids. And I'm going to do that. And I latched onto that. And that has been my driving force. That's what got me to the United Nations. That's what's made me live my life the way that I have, is that very clear perspective that not only was someone suffering worse than I am, but in my own agency, I could do something about it. And I was going to do something about it, and I did.
I love that. I love that. So, for those who don't know your story, you were diagnosed with HBMI. Um, Share with those who don't have this familiarity, because I know you're doing this incredible documentary. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. I can't wait to share that just outlandish, brave, and courageous story of yourself. But share with those who aren't as familiar with what's going on in you from a health perspective. And really, the underlying question I want to ask you is, you show up for years in service of others, perspective, and all these gifts that came to you. How did that help you when you were navigating those early days, those early months and years of your diagnosis?
Sure. In my late 20s, I started to experience a series of falls, and I was dancing a lot when I wasn't working. So I love to dance, and Latin dancing was my favorite. I started falling or tripping while you're dancing, and you think it's the high heel shoes or the turns or the flips or whatever that you're doing. It became more frequent, and people would ask me, "Why are your hips moving like that?" I had a gait. Why it looks like you're limping. That sort of set off the alarm bells with my parents, who were visiting me from China. They were visiting me in Panama, where I was posted at the time. And we went to the doctors, and long story short, after four years of, is it this disease or the other, I was diagnosed with HIBM, hereditary inclusion body myopathy, which is a very rare muscle wasting disease. It is genetic, it's hereditary from both parents, it's a recessive condition. And the chances, there are only about 200 known patients in the United States and about 1,000 known patients worldwide. What makes it even more rare in my case is that my father is from India and my birth mother is from England. So the chances of two foreigners meeting in a city, coming together and having a child with only a 25% chance of passing it on are just unbelievable. My brother does not have the condition, nor do we know anyone else on either side of the family with this very rare chronic illness. What's happening is that all of the skeletal muscles, of which you have 650 in your body from your head to your toes, which are used for movement, they are wasting away at an accelerated rate because the body no longer produces sialic acid, which is the enzyme that makes muscles grow. And so as a result, it leads to what was told to me at the time of diagnosis, severe incapacity within 10 to 15 years of its onset. Now, I started having symptoms in my late 20s, mid-late 20s. I was diagnosed at the age of 30. And you asked how this diagnosis sort of impacted my life with the perspective I already had from the type of work that I was doing and from the trauma that I experienced as a child. Really, to me, it was the attitude that I had was, I don't know what this is. I'm afraid because not knowing instills fear in people. People were saying very scary things that were very foreign to me. I'd never grown up with anyone close to me in my daily life who had a disability or chronic illness. So we didn't know what the implications were. My parents, the word disability wasn't even my vocabulary in those first few years because we, all of us, have very ableist ideas of a negative connotation of what disability means, a negative connotation of what it means to live with a chronic illness. And that's what instills fear, the ignorance, the not knowing. What does this mean?
Yes.
And so I just kept going, meaning people were saying like, oh, well, you're going to give up your international career, obviously. And I was like, why would I do that? Or people say, well, no one's going to marry you this way. And I'm like, but why not? I want to get married. I have self-worth. I have something to offer. So these limitations that other people were putting on me because what they assumed that I could and could not do were totally unacceptable. You know, I'm 30 years old. I'd worked so hard to
Yes.
get to where I wanted to be and fulfill that childhood dream of being humanitarian. So I took the next job that was offered, and that was to serve with UNICEF in Angola. That's not to say that I didn't have a very difficult time coming to terms with my changing body, the loss of different abilities or functions, because society had told me, even my job, the organization that I was working with, is that someone with a disability is less than and could achieve less. And so I think I was this just constant drive and persistence and tenacity and determination and confidence that I built up over the years really was pushing me forward. I admit maybe to some extent to detriment of not yet looking and understanding my own self-worth now living with a disability. But I have spent a lot of time working through that and of course have come out on the other end as a very proud member of the disability community and showing to myself, and it's not so much I have to prove to you, it's proving to myself I'm the exact same person as I was before.
Yeah, that's a fascinating piece is that acceptance of, right? That it's not just I think what's really interesting the way you share that is you didn't need to getting to a place where you didn't feel like you needed to prove anything to anyone else, but also getting to the place where you feel like you don't need to prove anything to you either. Like how did you get to that place, that internal journey? Let's say someone's dealing with that diagnosis that maybe a disease or they've had a or an illness or they've had an accident that is rendering them in a position where their body is not able to do what it used to, in whatever way that might mean. What wisdom do you have to share after going through this journey of accepting and loving your disabled body? What wisdom do you have to share to others from that process yourself?
First and foremost, I would say be kind to yourself. You are no less of a person, less valuable, or less wonderful and unique. And secondly, ask for help. And help is in different ways. To expect ourselves to figure it all out, I think is unrealistic. I think therapy is a wonderful resource where professionals are able to help you guide you through situations. So often what we're feeling, insecurities we might have, questions have nothing to do with the disability or the impairment or the illness. they're in our minds. They have to do with our own self-worth, self-appreciation. And therapy very much helped me understand. My therapist said to me, she goes, you bring so much strength to your work with your disability. Why don't you do that in your personal life?
Mm.
And that was a huge light bulb. I mean, I have been advocating for the rights of children with disabilities for years with UNICEF. I came to the United States as a spokesperson for children with disabilities and was doing a speaking tour. But the ableist ideas of my self-worth now living with a disability were still haunting me. And when I realized that, one, sharing my own story, finding like-minded or people in similar situations, whether it was other people with HIBM or other people with different types of disabilities who were facing barriers, really helped me because I was so proud of them. I thought, gosh, how fantastic are they charging, doing this, doing that? And I said, wow, it's like giving advice to a girlfriend. Why don't we take our own advice? Why don't we feel the same self-worth in ourselves? And it took time. It wasn't an overnight success. I don't think anything was an overnight success. Is sketchy.
It's
And
very
same with
sketchy.
our own personal journey. Girlfriends now will say to me, they'll say, you have insecurities, but none of them have to do with your disability. It's like, yeah. I took a really hard look at myself, even dating. Dating with a disability is hard. I think it's also a fantastic filter to get rid of, those who are not the right fit for you, who are not going to see you and your soul and who you are as a human being. I didn't get married till the age of 40. And my husband was very much, didn't marry me or be in a relationship with me despite my disability, but rather the way that I live this life with dignity. So for people who are in those early stages of fear and uncertainty, educate yourself, learn about your condition and the prognosis, try to find other people. And we have this wonderful gift called the internet, who have the same condition with you. Maybe you don't find exactly someone, but other people who are facing similar challenges. I strongly encourage not only that person, but their families, caregivers, partners, friends to get into therapy. And it can be spiritual therapy, it might be a chat group, whatever it may be, some sort of outside professional guidance. Because your friends and family are going to speak from their own fears, their own ableist ideas. They're going to want to overprotect you. And I think having a professional who's going to look at you as a whole human being, just not you and the struggles, and they're not trying to fix problems for you, meaning they're not trying to fix, you can't reach for that or reach, is going to make a big difference. And most importantly, continue to do the things you love. That by continuing holding on to your passions. So one of my passions was dancing.
Yes.
I had to find a new way to dance. I also found new passions. And as I'm now in the much more serious phase of HIBM, I realized that there are some things that I love that I never pursued. I am so conscious of the limited time that I have, or may not. Who knows what's going to happen in the future. But for example, my fingers, I'm losing my grip, and I don't have much strength in the index finger on my left hand. So I asked my husband to buy me an electrical piano for my birthday because I want to learn how to play piano.
Oh, I love it.
I want to learn how to sew. So my neighbor, who's a seamstress, is teaching me how to sew my first cloak.
Oh, how cool.
These are things that you need to use your fingers for. So I'm finding new passions that fill the void of not being able to dance, the activity that took up most of my free time, the way I used to before.
I think one of the things that there's two places of wisdom that I think you have. There's many, but there's two that really are jumping off the page for me right now. One of them that you just said that is so profound is that many of us live this idea that we think that life is infinite, that we have this infinite amount of time to do, like, I'll do that tomorrow, and we'll delay the things that when we're 90, when we're 80, if we're so fortunate to live that long, we delay the things that really at 80 and 90 are what people talk about. They don't talk about, that extra 12-hour work, like that 60-hour work week they put in that was super unnecessary, but they were driving for that promotion because they really hadn't accepted who they were and they needed professional validation of their worthiness, right? What I think is so profound in what you just shared is that what I heard you say wasn't, hey, what I'm putting my energy in is this new, entrepreneurial opportunity. It isn't this, it's the things that bring you joy. Is that you're seeking joy in the stage and phase of your life because you recognize the fragility of it. That's incredible.
I even more so than it's not so much the fragility. Yes, there is an acknowledgement of the physical fragility and the living with a chronic illness and the change in my body. But I'm recognizing the value of life, the joy of living. And how do I find that joy? What is it that brings me joy? That's a
What? How would you
conversation
define?
that
How would you define living then? Like what would you define living as? Like in your
I
in
often,
your in your way.
yeah, I often ask myself the question on my deathbed, what are the things that I don't want to regret?
Mm.
So for me, living is doing the things, it's not having regrets. And the only reason you have regrets is because you didn't put in the time and the effort to do it. So just do it. It might look different, but that's okay. I play piano the way that I did when I was 17? No. I can't use the pedals. So the song sounds a little funky. Who cares? It's not about that. It's about the joy that I feel of a new kind of artistic creativity or artistic expression.
Love that.
And so it's again, I think that to assume that things will be the same is doing yourself a misservice.
Mm.
And that things have to be perfect, says who? And so by making my own rules and defining for me what is it, having the conversation with myself, what is it that brings you joy? But I also want to note that I'm balancing that with the acknowledgement that I am an entrepreneur looking for that, trying to build the companies that I have, because there are very stark realities about the financial costs of living with a disability or a chronic illness. Not every time there's a big check or a paycheck, or there's a long list of things that I have that we cannot afford yet that will allow me to live my life more independently or make things easier on my husband or my parents when they help, for all of those people who are helping me on a day to day. And that's very real to talk about. Yes, I can live my life with absolute joy, which helps honestly alleviate the stress that I feel of not being able to afford everything that we need.
Yeah, that's the thing I think is so often not, people who aren't living with a close family member themselves with a disability, they're unaware of the financial implications that are placed upon a family when they have to navigate, or an individual when they have to navigate finding independence through living in a world that is designed for able-bodied individuals. To help, one of the things I fundamentally believe in our intentionality in this podcast is to educate people, and help raise people's awareness for things they aren't aware of. So, would you mind sharing like a little bit about that element so others can understand the nuances of the challenges that you face from being able to navigate a world that is primarily designed for those who are able-bodied?
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up the first 30 years of my life without any sort of physical impairment. So I really come from a place of learning the hard way, learning on the job, right? My favorite. And I do think that I thrive most when I'm not in my comfort zone. So I have been handed a lifetime of discomfort. And so I'm really trying to learn from it and make the best that I can. I didn't have to take into consideration every aspect of logistics before, when I could just jump in, leave my house without a ramp, get into a vehicle, start it, drive it without $30,000 or up to $100,000 hand controls, electrical hand controls, in an accessible wheelchair vehicle, or going to the bathroom without grip bars, or wanting to have a shower independently, or going to any sort of business meeting and not knowing, oh, can I access the room or even the building itself? Is there going to be a ramp and elevators? And let's specifically talk about the United States, which has the Americans with Disabilities Act that's 30 years old now. People say, oh, but there's the ADA. Those things are taken care of. No, first and foremost, the law is not universally abided by. So there are, sure, maybe in federal buildings, because it's federal law and there's funding that's invested, I can probably go to almost any federal building in the United States and gain physical access into the building itself. But that doesn't mean that to go to the bathroom, I don't have to go to the basement or to the top floor just to go to the loo, right?
Right.
But those costs are not only in my home, they're also outside in society. And what we said about people not knowing, or that this world wasn't built for people with disabilities, when people without disabilities understand what a universal experience it is, that all of us, for some period in our lives, some period of time, we will have a disability, and that doesn't necessarily mean a physical impairment. It could be a cognitive impairment or mental health issue. These issues of accessibility are going to impact their lives. So, one, we have to create awareness that one, it isn't a we and you or we and them issue, it is an us issue. Because for those who think, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me, that applies, that, well, it is one day going to apply to you and your loved ones. And I think that when we start dismantling the idea that, oh, but why would we need to create a space for people with disabilities? Well, why not? I want to go to the restaurant. I want to go to the movie concert. I want to go to the festival. I want to work at that building, right? I want to go up on that stage. Do you know how many times I've had people are hiring me to do a speaking engagement, but they don't want to pay for a ramp?
What?
Oh, oh yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
how?
So there's a, or I'm being given an award, and they'll say, "Oh, well, you're going to accept your award from the floor, and the other nominees are going to be up at the stage."
Come
And I was
on.
like, "Oh yeah," and I'll say, "Oh, thank you very much for the award. You can send it to me in the mail." And what does that do? They're so like, "Oh, I can't believe it." It opens the door for me to explain why that's wrong, you know. But
I
what's the point here? We need to have these conversations. I didn't know how bad the situation of people with disabilities and chronic illnesses was before I was living this. And it's not to say that I want anyone to be diagnosed with HIBM to have to come to this understanding and knowledge. No, we are so lucky. Again, you have the internet. There's so many resources out there to learn about the lives of people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, whether it's through film, watch Crip Camp, watch Rising Phoenix, watch Gleason, and those are with people with disabilities in those roles. That's what we're going to see in front and behind of the camera. Or go on the internet and Google. Check it out. Check it out on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever. There's something for all generations.
right, right. I'll leave TikTok for somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, I try. I know, just not my space, but that's okay. I'll allow the ageism if somebody wants to apply that to me. That is just not my space, and nor am I going to be dancing to anything and doing whatever. So thank you very much. What I think just so special is that I am blessed to have individuals in my life who've taught me so much. And I'm learning so much from this conversation. So first, I just want to pause and say thank you. This is just the energy you bring. And through just being you, you'll give the opportunity for individuals to have a different perception and a different understanding. And I think one of the things that I see, and I'm just curious your thoughts on this, is that I believe that the disabled community is a untapped resource of wisdom, knowledge, power, and gifts to this world, and that they're individuals that simply because of the state of their physical body, we are not setting up this world in such a way that they can give their gifts as easily, that they're dying with their music in them, not by choice, which so many do, but because the circumstances that are around them. So share with me, like, as you see the disabled community, like what impact do you think that is having on the world, if you agree with what I'm saying? What impact is that having on the world for us not to make it easier for those who are living with disabilities to share their gifts to the community at large?
So let's first and foremost say who is the community of people with disabilities. We're talking in America about 64 million people, and worldwide 1.3 billion people.
Holy
We're
man.
the largest minority anywhere. So, and I don't even know, you talk about that large of a number of people. If you account one family member and a caregiver, you're talking about 75% of the world population. That's not a minority
No,
who
it's
is
not. No.
directly impacted by disability. Secondly, people with disabilities, as defined by the World Health Organization, or for an American context, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, accounts for people with physical, mental, cognitive, and developmental disabilities. These can also include people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or people who are blind or have visual impairments. So we're talking about a very diverse group of people who, on top of that, whose intersectional identities are talking about every race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, age group. So we're talking about a very diverse, complex group of people. And so to create solutions for an entire that many diverse people is really hard. And I think that's why a lot of organizations, people, companies are so afraid, because it's literally fear, or don't know where to start. Oh, this is too difficult to tackle. And first and foremost, it's not. Why? Because we, all of us, people with disabilities, we have the solutions, because we're living in a world that wasn't made for us, not only in terms of physical barriers, but there can also be accessibility barriers, but first and foremost, attitudinal barriers. And so, how can we change that is by imparting knowledge. Because when we educate people, we change their attitudes and therefore their behaviors. This call to action of how to change the world for people with disabilities really comes from how can I ensure that I am not excluding people with disabilities? And as I mentioned before, the best way to do that is to ask people with disabilities. When you're in your community, in your faith group, in your civic group, in your office, asking these questions of yourselves, you're not going to have the answer unless you have a lived experience or you've done some really good research. And even then, and this is really falling in line with the international motto of the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us,
Mm.
bring people with disabilities into the conversation. And so often we'll be like, well, I don't know where they are. Well, lucky for you, we're everywhere. Again, you can do some very simple research for disabled people's organizations or organizations of people with disabilities, local groups, even in your faith group, or ask in your community, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Can anyone provide some insight? There's also a plethora of us actual experts in disability inclusion and accessibility and the ADA. And again, check out on LinkedIn. We're all over the place. I think including us in those conversations is going to break down those barriers and make the world more accessible. So all of you without disabilities, when you join the club, you'll be so glad that you did, because you'll be a lot more informed.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest driving elements of this podcast, is that I aim to interview people who are speaking into existence the kind of world I want to exist for my three kids. And they're living into existence, and they're sharing into existence, and they're working to create the kind of world that, because I have three young kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what their future holds for them. Right now, they do not, none of them are living with a disability, but there is no promise of that for them or myself. And I shared this with you that, I went down and I ran in the foundation that's right in there in your neck of the woods, the Kyle Peace Foundation, and it was all through the filter of the understanding, right, that of tremendous gratitude and celebration, right,
Mm-hmm.
that I learned more watching those in-chair athletes enjoy the experience of endurance than I ever have running without a push assist athlete, somebody who needs that, assistance from somebody else to experience an endurance event. And I think that's one of the things that is so often misunderstood, is that it's perceived that the able-bodied world is the only giver, the only gift giver, that we are the ones helping the disabled world, that those who are living without a disability. We are the, well, gosh, where would you, Cara, where would you be without us able-bodied people? And the reality is, right? I hear you chuckling. But the reality is that I received tenfold the gifts from that experience than I received. I gave
Well,
my, yeah, go ahead, please.
I think that what we want to stay away from is the inspirational porn, where people with disabilities are so inspiring that they make us feel so much better about our lives, and wow. And I'm not implying at all that that's what you're experiencing. But what's happening when you go to these events is that it's changing your perspective. It's
Yes.
dismantling the ideas that you had were grown up with and taught by your teachers and your parents and pop culture and the media, that living with a disability is sad. That's what it's done. And for your children, I love the idea that you're learning so much about this so that you can encourage them to be curious. So often, especially before I transitioned to a wheelchair, I had a walker and I painted it bright gold. And because Gold's my favorite color. Her name was Cleopatra.
Oh,
All
that's
my
so fantastic.
all my sister maids get names because we make them part of the family. But so often I'd be walking in the grocery store and my legs kick out forward, and children are just gobsmacked, even with the wheelchair now, because it's actually really kind of cute. Mom or dad, or why is that lady walk like that? Or how come they're in that chair? How come they're, and the mother or the parent or the person they're with will say, shh, 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 shh. They hush the child. So now you've given this child the message that not only is there something wrong with their question, there's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm within earshot, and I hear this, I can usually see it because the big eyes of the kid and the wow and the little pointing finger. If I'm close enough, I'll go over and say hello and say, hi, how are you? My name's Cara. And the kid will just directly, ask me, why are you in that wheelchair?
Yeah.
And I, I personally, and this is a personal preference, invite the question because I want to destigmatize that I don't want the child to be afraid of me or think that their natural curiosity is wrong. And I'll tell them, I have weak muscles. And so walking is hard for me. So I use the chair. You know what? 10 out of 10, that's all the kid wants to know. They're like, oh, cool. Can I ride it? Can I sit in your lap? Can I try? That is really it. Children want that innocent curiosity. And
Yes.
remember, what is the difference if the parent thinks it's rude? But why? The tone was not rude. If an adult came up to me like, ugh, what's wrong with you? Why are you using that? Which is often like a TSA experience I have. If you had asked me politely, I'd be very happy to educate you. But now that you've made me mad and insulted me and been so degrading, because you're implying that I am less than you. I am less of a human being who deserves less respect and dignity than the other passenger who's able to walk through, you know? So as people with disabilities, a lot of people are happy to educate others. Some people don't. I don't want to be your teacher. We see this in the civil rights, social justice movement
Yes.
around racism right now, which I think is very fair. Other of us, like me, are very happy to answer the questions as long as you haven't been rude and really make me mad. That Time article that I shared with you is just saying, some people also just want to be left alone. Our assistive aids are sometimes like an extension of our bodies. People in wheelchairs who use manual chairs, they don't want you to push them. Ask them first. You're assuming that they can't do it on their own. Me in a power chair, someone might rush and assume that I can't open the door myself. Well, sometimes I can't. I always like that there's the opportunity to be able to educate so that I can help change their attitudes and in turn their behavior.
Yeah, I love that. And no, you're correct. Like it's a perspective changing experience. That was the
Mm-hmm.
gift, right? In that journey and redefining what communication means and how communication can
Mm-hmm.
unfold. So many perspective changing moments of connecting with people who communicate different than me, that experience life a little bit different than me. So for you, what is the biggest misconception that the able bodied community has of the disabled community that you feel that if you were able to change or reshape the way others see people with disabilities would really make a profound and positive impact on the world? I know that that's maybe a paraphrasing of one of your
Mm-hmm.
missions, but share with me, like, what is it, like, what do you want people to just like let go of and open their minds to in a way that you feel not only would serve the disabled community, but quite candidly, in my humble opinion, I think you'd align with this, would serve the whole world, serve all of us in general.
The negative connotation of disability is unwarranted. And when you bring people with disabilities who are natural innovators, we are creative, we have so much to offer. When you bring us into your lives, or your project or your company or your organization, it's going to make it more rich and more diverse. And you're going to learn things that are going to blow your mind. I think also that when you have more engagement with people who are different, you realize that we're just like everyone else. Not all of us are nice. Not all of us are saints and do gooders. They're sort of like we're just normal human beings who have hopes, dreams, families, aspirations, and all the good and the bad that comes with being a human being. We're trying to live our best lives. We're doing the best that we can. We have so many universal truths just like everybody else. So this idea that we are somehow, Martians or a different race or ethnicity or a different kind of person that isn't deserving of the exact same opportunities, access, justice that you are is wrong. And so I really encourage people to have conversations, ask, ask yourself, really, do I know anything about this? Because again, when you can acknowledge and intellectually understand, emotionally, it's not going to hit you unless you ever experience that this could happen to you someday as well, just like being born and just like dying is a universal experience, then maybe we can be more open-minded to having intellectual and helpful conversations.
I love that. I love that. One of the things that I think is so special in these conversations is that you simply cannot understand someone's lived experience until you create a dialogue and an open
Mm-hmm.
and a free dialogue to understand it. And when you have these dialogues that I'm so blessed to have, like the one we're having right now, then I'll walk away from this connection with you forever changed, right? Like you, because I've opened myself to truly hear and experience internally. And this is the wisdom you just gave me, right? Is that our dreams, right, are not a physical experience, but they're an emotional, spiritual, and psychological experience. And so your body may change over time of what you can do without an assisted device, but the dreams have nothing to do with the physical body. The dreams are internal. They're a spiritual experience, not a physical experience. And so obviously nothing changed when you had your diagnosis because the diagnosis had nothing to do with the human spirit inside of Kara.
True, absolutely. But I think that again, because we're not taught that, that isn't the norm. And let's give a very concrete example. The reason that there is so much, if anyone listening to this is going to be like, oh yeah, well that sounds right. Well, of course. Yeah, but not of course. That's not what we're seeing on screen, in magazines, in pop culture, in music, in movies. When you don't have the representation, the equal and accurate representation of the lives of people with disabilities, and remember, we're a massive group, there's so much diversity among us, or when it isn't people with disabilities who are creating what we are taught, what we hear, or what we see, then you're missing out on exactly that we are the same. And so it creates and maintains that divide that somehow we must be different. It all ties back to not knowing, ignorance, not being informed, not being exposed to. And we really want to dismantle these very dangerous ideas. In the United States, when I say dangerous ideas, I mean they can be life-threatening at times. Because if you don't think that I have the same value as you as a human being, when we start to dehumanize people,
Mm,
that's when things get very, very sketchy. You can then somehow justify that my life has less worth than yours. And in some countries around the world, that is a question of life and death for people with disabilities.
yeah,
Even in America, it can be access to healthcare. It can still be a question of life and death.
absolutely.
I find it atrocious and preposterous that people with disabilities are not being prioritized to have access to the COVID vaccine. It's just astonishing.
Yeah,
But that's an entirely new conversation.
it is, and I could like correct. Like it's so my friends in the Kyle Peace Foundation, I've been in communication with them throughout this whole journey and sent a lot of videos and my family's written cards to try to help them feel less isolated. Meant just all of us feel somewhat isolated, but that community, the disabled community specifically, those who are more susceptible to this, the Kyle Peace Foundation or supports individuals with cerebral palsy, and that whole community is extraordinarily susceptible to the COVID vaccine, the COVID virus.
Mm-hmm.
And I could like, in absence of the vaccine, they don't. It's very dangerous for them to have full agency and experience life at the level that they do.
Well, I think yes, it has taken away the ability, and just like for everybody else, the ability to interact, to go out of your houses. I have been staying home since last March. I'm an extrovert. I can't wait to hug my people and eat out and go to festival, but I cannot take the risk of getting COVID. I have underlying health conditions. It would be disastrous, if not take my life. So I'm not risking that. But I would also say that the fact we're almost lucky in a way that this pandemic happened, and it's not to say that it's universal, but in a way, it's been an equalizer for me in some sense. And let me explain that. I'm a wheelchair user. And so if I can't necessarily always afford to travel because I need someone to come with me, so it's double the cost to go to every conference. I went to more conferences in 2020 because they were virtual than I did the year before, simply
Mm,
because things were made more accessible and online. Entrepreneurs, companies understood the value of working from home, as so many people with disabilities do, because they can't receive the accommodations or don't have access to be able to get to the work in the workplace, and so they work from home. So it's helping companies understand that there's so much value and same, if not more, levels of productivity from working from home, not only for people with disabilities, but also for those without. Now, yes, has it been isolating? Absolutely. But there's also something to be said that for people without disabilities to learn from how people with disabilities, now you know how we feel
mm,
in that you're being isolated. It's the ways that we've been being isolated and how I have been the past 15 years.
mm. That's powerful. All right, so we've waited too long to talk about your incredible adventure, right?
Mm.
And I can't even put into words. I've watched the trailer, the teaser, the just and um, I won't even begin to do this justice. I'm glad to see the black eyes have cleared up, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm sure that was, but her inescapable brave mission, this adventure, this incredible adventure down the Grand Canyon on the Colorado River, truly, truly, just I mean, just the courage to do that is so special. So talk to us, talk to us a little bit about the adventure, about the documentary, and really this idea. And the word that stood out to me, really, every time I say it, is the word inescapable. That's the word just really speaks to me so much in that title. So tell us a little bit about the adventure, the documentary, and more specifically, why did you feel that that adventure was inescapable for you?
Sure. So, Her Inescapable Brave Mission is the title of a feature documentary film that will be about my life. And a part of it is a 12-day expedition that I did in April 2018 to cross the Grand Canyon on horseback from rim to rim over 4 days, and then whitewater raft 150 miles up the Colorado River. I did the expedition because in this fantastic international career that I've had, I've been so blessed to explore. I've been in the Amazonian jungle on whitewater rafts. I've climbed mountains. I've ridden four-wheelers up the sand dunes of Namibia. I've been on boat rides in some of the oldest parts of mountains of China. And when I moved to the United States 7 years ago in 2014, I thought, what kind of adventure could I have here? And what's more grand than the Grand Canyon? I'd never been before. And I started doing research, and I was intrigued by this statistic that at the time was for every 5 million people who go to the rim of Grand Canyon, only 1% go down. And I think today it's now 6 million. And I was so like, I want to go down. I want to explore. I'm not the type of tourist who just arrives and is satisfied with a photograph. I really want to get in there. And I love camping and I love the outdoors. But when I continued to do my research and understand that it isn't accessible and it's paved, which I think is wonderful, it's true wilderness, I thought, I'm not going to get very far with my leg braces and my canes. And then I transitioned to a walker. So I thought, I'll learn to ride a horse. Again, this sort of big idea me who believes that I'm always trying to figure out how to break down barriers. In this case, these were physical access barriers. And it took 2 years to it was actually 4 years from when I came up with the idea to when we actually did the expedition. 2 years of fundraising to be able to afford to do all of this. Um, and the part that was inescapable was, if you noticed, the name of the film, Her Inescapable Brave Mission, is using the acronym of my condition, HIBM. And for me, the journey of being unable to escape from this condition, there is no approved treatment or cure for my disease, was similar to once you're in the belly of the Grand Canyon, you can't just escape. Like I was injured multiple times on the expedition. The black eyes you're referring to was in the first hour of the
Oh
descent.
goodness.
I lost my balance and couldn't. I didn't have this. I wasn't positioned in the right way not to be flung forward in the saddle. The horse went down an oversized step, and I smacked my face on the back of the horse's head. My helmet got completely pushed up, which caused an egg-sized bump on my head, and then that drained into my face as those two fantastic black eyes. But when you're in the belly of it, the only way to escape would have been with a helicopter evacuation. And so once you're in the Grand Canyon, and especially once you begin this expedition and head down the Colorado River, or even going up to the North Rim, which is even more isolated than the South Rim, it was, what do I need to do to persevere? And the courage of doing that, using the word brave, which in the disability community has a very negative connotation to say we're so brave for living our lives with disability. It had nothing to do with my impairment. It was with my severe fear of heights. I had no idea until I arrived at the edge of the South Rim, looking on, not even on my feet on the ground. I'm on a wild Mustang horse, 8 feet above the ground. Looking down the 5,000-foot descent for me was terrifying. So it was mustering up the courage to be able to go down. And that was only day one, 10 hours in the saddle, a 5,000-foot descent of absolute terror, of a fear of heights, you know? So that perseverance and finding the courage to keep going when I was sad, finding the resilience to keep going when I was beat up and bruised and sprained ankles, and when I was exhausted, you know? For me, that's like the parallel sometimes I feel like in my life. I'm trying to break down so many barriers, most often those attitudinal barriers with people who think that I can't, or how will I cope, or gosh, that's too much for you. That's not your place. Thank you very much. I'll cope just fine. But yes, it is exhausting, constantly trying to break. But you know what? It's inescapable. Because if I want to live my highest power of maxing out my humanity and living with the most joy possible, it's going to be exhausting. But it's a place that I don't want to escape from.
Ah, that's incredible. And watching you, like, so I kid. I'm not even 5'6", and I say my creator must have known I had a fear of heights, so he didn't make me very tall, right? I hear like that is like I want to run the rim, the rim, the rim. I want to, and but like that's my big holdback. It's not the physical like training to get to the place to do that. It's the fact that I'm gonna be so high. So when I heard you
Right.
share that, I'm like, I feel you. I completely feel you. Like, no, thank you. Like, and then
Well,
put me on
you,
a horse. Holy bananas.
yeah, you'll be very happy to know that if you run it rim to rim to rim, you can do a different trail. You don't have to do the South Kaibab Trail down the South Rim. You can take what is it called, Angel Trail. I'll hook you up. Don't worry, I got
You
resources.
know,
We'll
if you,
find you another way. You will run it rim to rim to rim.
I'll share this. Like to me, um, I think there's a gift in leaning into our fears and discomforts. I think all of our power is there. All of the growth, all of the opportunity is leaning into those big fears of our lives and recognizing that they don't have power over us when possible, right? And those psychological fears. Like there's certainly things like I'm not going to be dunking a basketball on a regulation rim anytime soon. That is not within my physical capabilities. I'm completely okay with that, right? Kind of. I live in Indiana. Kind of. Like basketball is a big deal in this state, but it's a funny story for another day about my wife and I. But nonetheless, my point is this: like, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I would do it the way that required me to work through the fear that I've chosen, so I can have the courage and the gifts that come from the other end of it. So,
I think something important to acknowledge when we talk about being courageous or being brave, you don't need to be fearless. I think a combination of the two is very, very healthy and natural. You
yes,
know, if you're not going to be scared, you might do something foolish. And if you're overly confident and think, oh, I'm so brave, I can do anything, you probably do something stupid and get yourself in trouble. So I think it's a healthy balance. But I really think also what I took from the expedition was one, first and foremost, I can do anything. I set my
mm,
mind to, as you said, you know, it really is in our mindset. But secondly, also is, and this is what I've learned with living with HIBM, is that my greatest source of strength is in my struggle. And when
Mm,
I am willing to be vulnerable and ask for help and see that vulnerability as the most beautiful, authentic expression of myself, the most sincere way that I can share and show myself to others, then it's going to be the most wonderful life experience that I could have.
wow. Mm, thanks for that. That's incredible. That resonates with me so deeply. So deeply. And I think one of the things that you and I had the honor of connecting with before we hit record here is that I think one of the things that's beautiful about you is you carry on this tradition of some very strong women that you
Mm-hmm.
were raised by strong women. You know, no doubt are a strong female, right? And what, like, as you think about this journey of taking on this inescapable brave mission, and uh, what what influenced the having these strong women, your aunts, your mother, in your life? How did that help with your own agency and empowerment in your journey so far in life?
My Indian grandmother and my father's sisters, in particular, are very bold, outspoken, highly educated, powerful women and leaders in our family. And my grandmother specifically taught me that whatever platform life gives you, do use that platform in service of others,
Mm,
to do good for others and for society. And my aunts have set the example of not only being exceptional in terms of their personal excellence as human beings and as women and examples to follow, but also in their careers. Was a judge for the Canadian Refugee Board, worked for the United Nations for some time. Another one works with refugees from around the world. Another one is a filmmaker and has been working in and out of Gaza for years with youth in conflict zones. My cousin Afshan is a senior diplomat in the UN, has devoted her entire life to serving children. And when you have that example, when you see that representation, you know that it's possible. And so for me, having grown up without seeing enough women with disabilities in that same position of power and influence and meaning and purpose, I hope that I am somehow helping pave the way to be an example for not only my cousins and my nieces and nephews, but also for people who I don't know, who aspire to fulfill all their dreams. That with all the naysayers and the barriers that they're going to confront in their lives, especially for kids with disabilities, is that they can see that representation in me and in other people, other advocates or people with disabilities, and just go for it.
that's beautiful. It's beautiful, and I think one of the things that's so profound there is this lesson that, and I think you said your mother gave you that whatever platform, it was your aunt, forgive me,
My grandmother,
your
my
grandmother,
grandmother.
forgive me, your
Mm-hmm.
grandmother
That's
gave
okay.
you that whatever platform you're given, use it in service of others. Do
Mm-hmm.
you think that as you've navigated HIBM, do you think that if you did not have that lesson from your grandmother to use whatever platform you're given as a service to others, because that's exactly what you've done, is you've used your disability as a yet another way in your journey in this life to service others. Do you think in absence of that grounding value that you would have come to terms with your disability in the way that you have today?
So I think there's twofold. I say one thing is to come to terms with embracing your life living with a chronic illness and a disability. And another thing is to actually become an advocate and make it a career. And not, I don't think we should have the expectation that everyone with a disability or chronic illness needs to be a teacher, an advocate, or an activist, right?
Yes.
Do I think I would have done the same? Um, I hope that I was doing it before. But it was absolutely my grandmother's example and her teaching that made me know that it was possible and that I felt a moral responsibility and inclination to do it. It's like I've always found purpose in my life's example. I've been asked by many relatives, coming from a traditional in some ways, traditional Indian family or more conservative in especially younger generations. Why do you expose yourself like that? Talking about hi.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I
Um,
just kept talking and then I finished.
I hope I hope you enjoyed that. That was it.
Yeah.
So let me hit stop and let me hit.
You'll have to put out the last minute.
Yeah, I know what it. I know where you said is. The last thing that I caught is why do you expose yourself like that?
You want me to fix it?
Let me fix one thing. Holy bananas. Somebody must. Anyways. Yeah, we'll just roll. Sorry, I'm not gonna be able to fix that while we're here. Yeah, are you comfortable picking up with that, and we'll just bring it together?
You cut out completely there again.
Ah, shit. Excuse me. I'm gonna kill this.